What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? We are finally back on YouTube. I am going to be posting training on here more as we prep for the Arnold. So don't worry about that. We don't need to be putting comments. Oh, you said you're going to get back on YouTube. You know, when are you going to do that? This is the return to YouTube. We're starting with something that I felt compelled to make, so that now opens the door for more consistent videos where it's like, okay, now that you've started, it's easier to keep going. But anyway, today's video is going to be a review of the new Avancis 1.5 shoe. Now, I'm going to try to keep this one short and sweet. I want this to be a one-taker here, but I am going to make the argument that this is probably the best all-around powerlifting shoe if you squat in flats, right? Because if I'm talking about all-around powerlifting shoe, it's something that if you wanted to buy or spend $100 once or whatever this shoe cost. I'm sorry, I don't even know the price. I haven't done my research. This was sent to me, so we'll put the link and you guys will be able to see. But regardless, if you want to pay for one shoe to use for all three lifts rather than having a shoe for every lift, as many people do nowadays, I would make the argument that this is the shoe. But most specifically, I want to talk about in this video why I like this shoe for deadlifts and what I think about it for bench press, because I do not squat in flat shoes. But I can deduce from wearing these that the stability of the shoe structure itself, as well as the grip and sturdiness of the sole, that this would be a good shoe for flats. I squat in heels. I'm not here to give you my feedback on that, but I would probably make the argument that the stability that this provides is really good. Now, if you watched Marcellus's video, the Swolefessor, he's made a video about what he thinks about the various flat shoes, why he uses Jordan specifically for squatting and the ankle support argument, all that sort of stuff. Feeling close to the ground, you might like slippers versus these, whatever. That's not my point of the video. My point of the video for today is to talk about deadlifts, and the point of my video is to talk about bench press. I have worn deadlift slippers since 2013. For the 10 years that I've been competing in powerlifting, I've worn slippers, whether I've competed conventional or sumo. And I've really doubled down on loving the slippers and thinking that deadlift slippers are the superior footwear choice for anybody pulling sumo. For conventional, it doesn't necessarily matter as much. You obviously don't want to be wearing a pair of Vans for something like a deadlift just because of the sole height. But I have been a huge proponent of slippers. I've promoted two in particular that I've thought up to this point were the best, specifically the Iwa gymnastic slipper because of its completely minimalist design, but then also having tread as the grip for the bottom, and the Notorious Lift Sumo Sole Gen 1s, as I think those have been the most minimalist yet grippy slipper that Notorious has made. Since then, I have tried pretty much every shoe that you can imagine for deadlift that people seem to like or prefer the stability of it to the lack of stability that some perceive in a slipper. Every one of them I've hated. I have disliked wrestling shoes. I have disliked the Vivo Barefoots. I have disliked the Reebok CrossFit lights or whatever they were called. I have disliked the Sabos. I've hated all of them. Haven't liked any of them. And the main reason for this is that they don't feel close enough to the ground. They don't compare to a slipper, and if you have a slipper that has enough grip, there's no reason to opt for a shoe. And I'm somebody who, I want to say this straight away, I'm not sponsored by Avancis, but I am the type of person who I will put in an absurd amount of effort to squeeze out a very, very small percentage on any given lift. So I would never wear anything that I felt took me back in the other direction. So like I said, I've tried every shoe imaginable up to this point, and I was sent a pair of the 1.5s. And I can honestly say that there is no noticeable difference in height above the ground in the Avancis when you compare them to a slipper. They're virtually indistinguishable in sole height from a Notorious slipper, or even from something like the Iwa or the metal deadlift slipper. So that, first of all, knocks off the primary concern I've had for every pair of shoes I've ever worn, which is that, sure, the grip feels nice, they feel stable, but I feel like I'm pulling from a deficit relative to the slippers that I've worn in the past. That's immediately discounted every shoe that I've worn because I think leverage is probably the most important thing that you can control with a decision like this. Obviously, in the long term, building more muscle and getting stronger is the most valuable variable that you can manipulate. But in the short term, If we can manage leverage to the best of our ability, it makes sense to do so. So immediately, this has beat out every other shoe. It feels exactly the same as my slippers in terms of height, but I will make two arguments that I think make it even better. The first is that, and I don't know how to explain this, and maybe the Avancis crew can say, oh yeah, we planned for something like this, or no, I didn't even know that, but I'm glad that you perceive it this way. There's no heel drop to this shoe, but when you wear it, it feels like it biases you more toward the forefoot. And if you've watched the Powerlifting Now video that I put out on Sumo, especially talking about wedging, it's advantageous and you want to try to actually shift your weight into the ball of the foot. And in order to produce force, to create propulsion, you have to pronate the foot and be in that midfoot / forefoot. Being on your heels is not something that you want during a deadlift at all. And when I wore these, the thing that I noticed on the first day, aside, like I said, from how minimalist they feel, is that it almost felt like it wanted me to be kind of more in this ball of foot area. So again, there's no heel height. This isn't higher, but it almost feels like the shape of the shoe drives you in that direction. So I was able to lean into that pronation and that forefoot pressure more. And it felt like I was able to generate a lot of tension in my quads, even more so than a pair of slippers, because the slippers are completely flat in terms of where they bias you in your center of mass. The additional plus now, so I'm going to summarize here because honestly I think this does it justice, is they are virtually indistinguishable in sole height from a slipper. And I think for a sumo deadlifter especially, the foot pressure that they bias you toward I think is advantageous. It certainly feels that way for me. The plus that I'll add is that the grip is better. The traction on these is much, much better than any deadlift slipper that you can find. And most people who do opt for a shoe will say that the reason they do that is for that grip, that stability on the ground, and sometimes them not feeling as connected to the floor if they have to deadlift on, maybe a crappy platform in the gym, or even if they maybe get unlucky and have kind of a crappy platform on meet day. This avoids that problem entirely. And while, as I talked about in my Powerlifting Now video as well, we don't want to be just rolling over to the outside of our shoe or biasing a lot of that rolling, there always is going to be a vector of force when you deadlift going that way, going horizontally. So having that extra friction and resistance is certainly a plus. And I mean, as you guys can see, the toe box here, the shape of the shoe, is wide enough that you don't really feel that rolling out over the shoe. And I know that sometimes is a concern that people have who do bias a bit more abduction, who do bias a bit more ER and supination, but you don't get that. This is a very, very stable shoe. In terms of sizing, so I had originally received a size 43, which is my normal shoe size if we do the conversion. It felt a little big. And the reason I think that that's a problem is that compared to slippers, the thing you have to remember is that a lot of shoes are designed in such a way that there's still material. Even if you fit snug in the shoe, there's still material between the end of your toes and the end of the shoe. And what that can actually do for a lot of people is they end up being narrower in their stance than they think, because the shoe is reaching the same point at the end of, relative to the floor, but where their foot actually is in the shoe places them somewhere narrower. And that was something that I kind of noticed in previous shoes that I've tried, as well as the 43s that I tried here. And since we take the insole out of these, I just sized down. So I had told them, hey guys, I love the shoe. I think it's absolutely fantastic, but I think I need a 42. So that's what this is. This is a 42. I think that if you're going to take the insole out, which chances are you will, if your goal is to feel as grounded as you can, I would probably size down 1. That's just my personal recommendation. So deadlifts, these knock it out of the park. I know that there have been some lifters like Alex Luckow, for example, who really prefers his Vivo barefoots, feels maybe slightly more like he's barefoot. I mean, that's definitely the feeling that shoe gives, but I think that's probably more so because of how not sturdy the sole is. I don't know that the height actually makes a difference, but it's simply that the Vivos are not this kind of grippy tread on the bottom. And I think that probably a reason somebody like Alex Luckow, so if you're listening and saying, wait, but I heard Alex say that he, or somebody else say that they don't really like it as much and they prefer a Vivo, look at his stance width. The amount of shear force he's producing on the ground is not the same as if you have a wider stance sumo. I think that since a lot of his force is just straight down and almost forward, there is no benefit to this grip if you like the feeling of almost being in socks. So that would be my playing devil's advocate here of why you might not like this shoe. But I would probably argue everybody who wears a slipper would like this shoe, because I have been the most picky person about slippers for the past decade of powerlifting. I have even dissuaded athletes of mine from switching from slippers to other shoes, because when I review their training footage, I can see the difference positionally. But with these, there's none of that. So knocked out of the park with these, the Avancis 1.5s, I think are the best deadlift shoe on the market, flat out. Now the question becomes, as this is a question as the bench specialist of the USAPL, I've been asked, Hyper-Vs or Avancis? I'm going to give my answer here, but I don't know that it matters all too much. The best bench shoe is the Hyper-V. I don't think that there's any disputing this. However, I don't think that it matters to have this level of advantage over this for 99.99% of people. I'm going to talk about first why I think these are better. So the first thing is that the grip patterns are not the same on these. And I don't know that the grip pattern on this is actually inherently better. I think the grip pattern on this is probably inherently better. But the thing that makes this the better bench shoe is what would make it a shitty shoe for everything else, which is simply how squishy the shoe is. And the reason I brought up the pattern is, and again, little quick physics lesson, while surface area or more contact doesn't necessarily produce more friction, because while giving you more surface area means more contact, it reduces the pressure at each point. So the fact that this shoe would give you more surface area by squishing down does not mean that it has more friction. It would be the same. But the fact that it's squishy, I think I have two hypotheses here. The first is that it changes the geometry of this to some degree that makes it stickier. I don't know if that happens. That's one guess as to maybe why this feels grippier than the Avancis. The second one is that since it is squishy and since the treads poke out just as much, if not a little bit more, that it creates some sort of suction. I don't know if that actually happens, but those are two hypotheses that I have. The third thing that I'm going to say, and I guess it's relevant to the squishiness, is that this simply is a softer rubber, which would make it worse as an all-around shoe than this, right? There's a trade-off that Avancis ultimately had to make. It's like, do we want to be the powerlifting shoe or do we want to be the bench shoe? And I don't think they want to be the bench shoe. I mean, look at this thing. It's ugly, it's flimsy. You wouldn't use it for any lift other than bench, right? So the thing that makes this shoe so great is why it won't beat this on bench alone. So ultimately, I think the pattern that they came up with here is genius, because the fact that it was able to compete with this shoe for friction is incredible, because I've never seen a shoe that can compete with this. So kudos to Avancis for that. It will lose out to this shoe if you're putting it to the test in the exact same conditions. And I think those exact same conditions have to be extreme. So what I mean by that is, when I put it to the test on a horse stall mat floor at a gym, this shoe will stick, this shoe will slide. I think because this shoe is squishy, it flattens to the ground, it sticks to the ground, whatever it does it better because of its squishiness, not because of the geometry of the tread. So if we're comparing apples to apples, in an extreme scenario like that, this shoe wins. This shoe doesn't. If I were to compete in a powerlifting meet and use the carpet that we use this year at Nationals, which is now going to be the standard going forward, this shoe would perform equally to this. There would be no difference in how this shoe keeps its grip versus this shoe. So even if you bench as extremely as me with foot position, you really won't notice a difference on the platform in the USAPL. If you're in the gym, this shoe wins. Now, if you're an IPF lifter watching this, you compete on Eleiko carpet at the international level. Even having your feet forward is at all is punished on that platform because that material is like a felt material. It's not carpet. With these, I've seen people slip with their forward foot position on the IPF stage. So the fact that forward feet to that degree is punished as much as it is, you wouldn't even be able to get away with these most of the time on that platform. So it wouldn't matter which one you were deciding between because the real problem you would have is I need to tuck my feet further back. Now, addressing the other 99% of the population that is not encompassed by my, mentioning of the foot position, I don't think that you need this shoe. Truly don't. If you have it, I would probably keep using it. I think that it's a better bench shoe if you already have it. But if you are somebody who doesn't have their feet way, way out in front of them, this shoe's not going anywhere. It's not. So ultimately, I think that if you ever had to decide, like, do I want to buy this shoe or do I want to buy this shoe and this shoe? Just buy this one. You're not going to need this shoe unless, like I said, you have a foot position like me that is way far out in front, your feet are way turned out, and you're not having the opportunity to train on like a competition platform or carpet. If you're in a slippery, the gym floor gets, humid or there's chalk or whatever that gets dusty on the floor, this is going to give you an edge. I don't discredit that. Certainly, I'm going to keep using these as long as I'm training in a gym that has just rubber floors. But this shoe does not slip on a competition platform that is carpet. And like I said, if you're competing at the IPF level and you're trying to find like the perfect shoe, if you have your feet way forward, like you're not going to find it. It's not going to work simply because of the material that they use. So ultimately the point that I'm trying to make is that this is just the best shoe that you can buy. It's flat out, like I said, it wins for deadlift against slippers. I don't have a case for my slippers anymore. And like I said earlier on in this video, I don't wear anything that I don't love because I would never sacrifice even a fraction of a percent for my total. And after my first session with these, I was very happy, but I knew that I would have to give it a primary session, pull a single to really know. And I had like one of my best singles at the weight that I took in these shoes. So I will officially be retiring my dusty old Notorious lifts, and I will be pulling in these going forward. And then for bench on the platform, if we're using like the Viking Stingray carpet, which is just this piece of shit carpet that happens to be really grippy that we used at Raw Nationals this year, could I bring these? Maybe, but do I need to? No. The final point that I will make though, as a con for this for bench, is the shape of the shoe. And I don't think this applies for a lot of people, but and now that I'm remembering this, I do want to bring it up, is that the shoe does lip up a little bit if you have a very extreme foot position. So if you have like a very wide stance and your feet are also turned out, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, the heel does pick up. And I don't think that there's really much avoiding that in any laced shoe. Simply because when you tie a shoe tight, or a shoe is stiff in its structure, there's a pull on the shoe from front to back. And if you tie a shoe tightly, it's going to pick up that heel. So what I would advise is if you're spotting like little amounts of that heel pickup in something like this, I would loosen all of the laces like completely and just shove your foot to the front of the shoe. Because if there's no strain from the lace section on the back of the shoe, and you're not pulling up with your foot or your heel bone being in the back of it, that heel will kind of rest more on the ground. So I guess I should kind of qualify my statement, maybe partially retract it and say that if you do have issues with that, and you've maybe tried the version 1s and you already have these, and you're wondering if you should just get them for bench, I would probably say to stick with these. But like I said, if you're looking for an all-around shoe and you have a relatively normal foot position, I would go with these. They definitely improved on the lipping problem in the back that the original version had. but just tie them really loose. You don't even need your shoes tight for bench anyway. So I would tie them looser. That would be, I guess, my one strike against these, as a bench shoe, because what I think makes them, like I said earlier, what makes them so great in so many aspects can somewhat hurt them, right? But it's like fractions that we're dealing with here, because like I said, I mean, for anybody with a normal foot position, this shoe is sticking on carpet. It's probably sticking on a slippery gym floor as well. If you have your feet way out in front and you own this shoe, keep benching with this shoe. If you're an international lifter with aspirations of competing at Worlds, I mean, maybe you go with this shoe, but like you're subject to the elements, definitely more so, and you're probably just gonna have to learn how to bench with your feet a bit more under you. But yeah, I mean, I guess to wrap things up here, going back to something like squat, I mean, I have squatted in flats in the past. I no longer do. I have not given these a shot for squats. I've heard a lot of really high-level lifters vouch on their behalf, like Ashton Ruska. But I think that it really boils down to whether or not you want that feeling of stiffness or stability of the sole, or if you want the feeling of being like against the ground. Like some people really prefer that like naked feeling of a slipper. If you like that, continue with your Notorious, for example. If you want the stability but the feeling of being grounded, I think these win. And then, like I said, if you want more of that ankle support, which personally I think is a placebo, I don't know how that would really impact you positively on a squat or a deadlift, but to each their own. If you want that, plenty of people squat in Jordans, which I think is a kind of a separate topic, considering that they do have a little bit of a heel drop to them. I mean, they're not marketed as such because they're a basketball shoe. They don't need to present that information, but they definitely do have some aspect of a heel to them. But I'm rambling anyway at this point. Avancis 1.5s, they did a phenomenal job with these. And ultimately, like I said, if you are a slipper loyalist, I would highly suggest giving these a try. And I think even if you're not, if you're a wrestling shoe guy, if you're a Sabo guy, I just think that this is a better shoe. Flat out, it provides all the stability that those shoes, or what you believe those shoes give you, but with the groundedness of a slipper. So I'm not going to be repetitive. That's the end of the video, guys. I appreciate you all watching. Like I said, tried to keep it short and sweet, but thank you so much, guys. I'll see you in the next video, which hopefully will be a meet prep training video. But anyways, take care.